My grandma gripped my hand tightly and whispered her final words before she died. "Check the back of the frames." So I did. Then I ran. Why didn't I see it sooner? The hospice room fell silent as my grandmother took her last breath. Her fingers, which had been clutching mine with surprising strength, suddenly went limp. I sat there, tears streaming down my face, trying to make sense of her cryptic final message. My grandmother Margaret had always been the picture of warmth and honesty, baking cookies and telling me stories about her antique shop. Never in my life would I have imagined that behind those kind eyes lay secrets that would turn my world upside down. After the funeral, when the house was finally empty of well-wishers, I remembered her words. I walked through her Victorian home, stopping at each framed photo. With trembling hands, I removed the first frame from the wall, a family portrait from when I was a child. When I opened the back, my blood ran cold. Hidden behind the innocent family photo was another image, my grandfather standing confidently beside men I recognized from news stories about organized crime. On the back, written in my grandmother's careful handwriting, "Frank with Sullivan Family, Chicago 1985. As I went from frame to frame, the evidence mounted. Financial records showing money flowing through the family antique store, threatening letters, and most disturbingly, a small flash drive taped to the back of my own childhood photo. I was so absorbed in these shocking discoveries that I almost missed the sound of breaking glass from the kitchen. Someone was in the house. Without thinking, I grabbed what evidence I could and fled through the back door, my grandmother's final warning echoing in my mind. The early morning dew soaked through my shoes as I cautiously approached my grandmother's house the next day. After spending a restless night at a motel, I had called the police to report the break-in, but when they arrived, all they found was a house in disarray. Officer Daniels, a heavy-set man with tired eyes, suggested it was probably just opportunistic burglars who knew the house was empty after the funeral. I don't think so. I insisted, standing in the living room where picture frames had been tossed aside, their backs ripped open. They were looking for something specific. Officer Daniels sighed. "Miss Wagner, people in this town respected your grandmother, but sometimes after a death, burglars see an opportunity. There's nothing to suggest anything more sinister." But I knew better. I was 32 years old, had been teaching art at Lincoln Elementary for 8 years, and had never encountered anything remotely criminal in our small Wisconsin town. Yet somehow my sweet grandmother, who made the best apple pie in Maple Creek, had been hiding connections to one of Chicago's most notorious crime families. After the police left, I gathered the remaining frames and carefully opened each one. Behind a wedding portrait, I found documents showing how my grandfather Frank, who had died when I was 10, had been using their antique business to launder money for the Sullivans. Bills of sale for items worth hundreds transformed into thousands on paper. Cash deposits that never matched inventory. A system so meticulous it must have taken years to perfect. My hands shook as I sank into my grandmother's floral armchair. The grandparents I remembered who took me to the park, who taught me to appreciate beautiful old things, who seemed so ordinary and loving, had been living a double life. The antique store that I had loved visiting as a child, with its fascinating treasures and mysterious history, had been nothing but a front for criminal activity. I reached for my phone and dialed my father's number. Thomas Wagner had left Maple Creek when I was 18, claiming the small town was suffocating him. Our relationship had become increasingly strained over the years, with brief phone calls on holidays and the occasional visit when he was passing through. Maybe now I understood why. "Goldie, I was just about to call you," he answered, his voice tight. "How are you holding up after the funeral?" "Dad, I need to ask you something," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Did you know about Grandpa Frank's connection to the Sullivan family?" The silence on the other end lasted several seconds too long. "What are you talking about? Where is this coming from?" His voice had shifted to something defensive. "Grandma's last words were to check the frames. The picture frames, Dad. I found things hidden behind them. Photos of Grandpa with known criminals, financial records." "Goldie, stop," he interrupted, his voice suddenly harsh. "Don't mess with things you don't understand. Your grandmother was confused at the end. Just leave it alone." "But Dad..." "I have to go. I'll call you later." The line went dead, leaving me even more confused and determined to find answers. My father knew something, and his reaction only confirmed that whatever I had stumbled upon was real and dangerous. I spent the afternoon carefully documenting everything I had found, organizing the papers and photos chronologically. It painted a disturbing picture my grandfather had somehow gotten involved with the Sullivans in the late 1972, and the antique business became their laundering operation. But something didn't add up. From the records, it seemed my grandmother had been keeping track of all of it, documenting every transaction, every meeting. As I was about to pack up for the evening, I found one more thing tucked behind a family portrait, a yellowed newspaper, clipping from 1994. The headline read, "Chicago journalist found dead after investigation into organized crime." The article detailed how David Carter had been researching ties between businesses and the Sullivan crime organization before his body was discovered in the Chicago River. In the margin, my grandmother had written in shaky handwriting, "This is what they'll do to us if we talk." My blood ran cold as I realized the true danger of what I had discovered. My grandmother hadn't just been keeping records, she had been gathering evidence, and now someone knew I had found it. The morning sun filtered through the dusty curtains of my childhood bedroom where I had spent another restless night. Every creak of the old house made me jump, and twice I had gotten up to check that all the doors and windows were locked. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that someone was waiting for me to lead them to whatever they were searching for. I needed help, but I couldn't trust the local police, not after they dismissed my concerns so easily. And my father's reaction had left me more unsettled than reassured. There was only one person in town I felt might listen without immediately thinking I was overreacting. Jackson Taylor had been my friend since 3rd grade when he defended me against bullies, teasing me about my unusual name. We had drifted apart after high school. He went to law school while I pursued teaching, but he had returned to Madison a few years ago to join a law firm. I hadn't seen him since my grandmother's diagnosis, when he had stopped by with a casserole and awkward condolences. I called his office and was surprised when he agreed to meet me for lunch that same day at a quiet cafe on the outskirts of town. Jackson had always been handsome in an understated way, with thoughtful brown eyes and a cautious smile. When I walked into the cafe, he stood up from his table and gave me a brief hug. "Goldie, it's good to see you, though. I wish it were under better circumstances. I'm really sorry about your grandmother." "Thanks for meeting me," I said, sliding into the booth across from him. "I need your advice, and this is going to sound crazy." "Try me," he said, taking a sip of his coffee. "I specialize in crazy these days." I had brought a small selection of what I had found, just enough to establish credibility without revealing everything. As Jackson examined the photos and financial records, his expression grew increasingly serious. "Where did you get these?" he asked, his voice low. I explained about my grandmother's final words and what I had discovered in the frames. "The police think the break-in was just a random burglary, but I'm sure whoever did it was looking for these documents." Jackson ran a hand through his hair. "Goldie, the Sullivan family isn't just some historical footnote. They're still very active, just more sophisticated than in the old days. I've encountered their legal fronts in some cases." He hesitated. "If what you're showing me is real, and I have no reason to think it isn't, you could be in serious danger." "So you believe me?" "Yes, I believe you, and I think I can help. My firm has some contacts in federal law enforcement who specialize in organized crime. Let me make some discreet inquiries." Over the next 3 days, Jackson used his legal connections to gather information. The Sullivans had evolved from traditional racketeering into more legitimate-seeming businesses, but their methods remained brutal when crossed. Most disturbing was what Jackson discovered. About timing, the family was apparently searching for something valuable that had disappeared about 25 years ago, around the time my grandfather died. Meanwhile, I decided to speak with my grandmother's neighbor, Eleanor Blackwood, who had lived next door for decades. At 82, Eleanor was still sharp as a tack, and had been my grandmother's closest friend. She was afraid of something at the end. Eleanor confided as we sat on her screened porch sipping lemonade that was too tart. About 3 months ago, Margaret started asking me to watch her house when she went to appointments. She made me promise that if anything happened to her, I'd keep an eye on you. On me. Why? Eleanor's weathered hand covered mine. She said you were the only one who would know what to do with what she left behind. That you had the heart to do what's right, even when it's hard. My throat tightened with emotion. What burden had my grandmother placed on me? "There's someone else who might be able to help," Eleanor said. "My grandson Nate is visiting from Chicago. He works in computer security. Perhaps he could look at that flash drive you mentioned. Nate turned out to be a lanky 30-year-old with an easygoing manner that belied his expertise. He agreed to help me decrypt the flash drive, warning that it might take some time if it was properly secured. Whoever created this knew what they were doing, he explained. As we sat at Eleanor's dining table, his laptop connected to the small device. There are multiple layers of encryption. I can break through them, but it's going to take a day or two. That evening, as I was heating up leftover casserole in my grandmother's kitchen, my cell phone rang with an unknown number. "Hello," I answered cautiously. "We know what you found," a male voice said without introduction. The voice was smooth, educated, and terrifying in its calmness. "Your grandmother should have minded her own business, and so should you. Give back what isn't yours, or things will get unpleasant. We're watching you, Goldie Wagner." The line went dead before I could respond. I stood frozen in the kitchen, the microwave beeping insistently in the background. They knew my name, they knew where I was, and they were watching. The next morning, Nate called to say he had partially broken through the encryption. When I arrived at Eleanor's house, his usual relaxed demeanor had been replaced by tension. "You need to see this," he said, turning his laptop screen toward me. The files showed financial transactions linking current state Senator Philip West to Sullivan family businesses, laundered money that had funded his first campaign 20 years ago. But what made my stomach drop were the photos' recent images showing my father Thomas meeting with West and an older man, Nate, identified as Patrick Sullivan, the current head of the family. "These were taken 3 months ago," Nate said quietly. "I'm sorry, Goldie, but your father is still involved with these people." I stared at the images, my father's face clear as day, smiling and shaking hands with men who had threatened and possibly killed to protect their secrets. The father who had told me to leave it alone, who had been absent for so much of my adult life, was still in the middle of whatever dangerous game my grandparents had been playing. "There's more," Nate continued. "These records suggest they're looking for evidence that could expose decades of corruption, evidence your grandmother might have collected. Evidence I might now have," I whispered, understanding finally dawning on me. I had uncovered only a fraction of what my grandmother had hidden. Whatever else she had gathered was valuable enough and damaging enough that powerful people were willing to threaten and intimidate to get it back. And my father, the man who should have been protecting me, was working with them. The drive to my father's apartment in Green Bay took just under 3 hours, but it felt like an eternity. Every mile increased my anger and sense of betrayal. The man who had taught me to ride a bike, who had cheered at my college graduation, who had claimed to love me, had been lying to me my entire life. Jackson had offered to come with me, but this confrontation needed to happen alone. Thomas Wagner lived in a nondescript apartment building near the hospital where he worked in administration. When I knocked on his door, the look of shock on his face confirmed he wasn't expecting me. "Goldie, what are you doing here?" He glanced nervously over my shoulder, as if expecting someone else. "We need to talk," I said, pushing past him into the apartment. "And this time you're going to tell me the truth." The place was sparsely furnished with few personal touches, much like our relationship had become. I turned to face him, pulling out my phone to show him the photos Nate had recovered from the flash drive. "Want to explain this? You and Senator West and Patrick Sullivan looking pretty friendly for someone who told me to leave it all alone." All the color drained from my father's face as he sank onto his couch. For a moment, he looked so much older than his 56 years, his shoulders slumped in defeat. "How did you find these?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "That doesn't matter. What matters is that you've been working with the people who threatened me, who broke into Grandma's house, the same people Grandpa was laundering money for." He flinched at my words. "It's not that simple, Goldie." "Then explain it to me. Explain why my grandparents were involved with criminals. Explain why you're still meeting with them. Explain why someone called to threaten me." My voice had risen to a shout, years of hurt and confusion pouring out. My father put his head in his hands, and when he looked up, I was shocked to see tears in his eyes. "It started with your grandfather," he began, his voice strained. "Frank was a good man, but he made a mistake. He borrowed money from the wrong people to expand the antique business. When he couldn't pay it back fast enough, they offered him a way out. Let them use the store to clean their money. And he agreed. Just like that. No, not just like that. They threatened him, threatened your grandmother, threatened me. We were trapped." My father's hands trembled slightly. "When I was old enough to understand what was happening, I tried to convince them to go to the police. But by then it was too late. We were in too deep. So what happened after Grandpa died? A shadow crossed my father's face. They expected me to take over. Your grandmother and I disagreed about what to do. I thought our only option was to keep playing along to protect the family. And Grandma, Margaret, was different. Stronger than any of us realized. After Frank died, she started keeping records of everything, every transaction, every meeting, every threat. She was building a case. I thought of the meticulous documentation I had found the newspaper clipping about the murdered journalist. She was gathering evidence to take them down. My father nodded. For years, she played along, all while documenting everything. She planned to take it to the FBI to get immunity for herself and for me. His voice broke. She was doing it for you, Goldie. So you wouldn't inherit our mistakes. Then why are you still meeting with them? I demanded, pointing at the photos. Why tell me to drop it if she was trying to fix things? Because it's not that simple, he snapped, then immediately deflated. When your grandmother got sick, the Sullivans thought she might have left evidence somewhere. They've been pressuring me to find it before anyone else does. Those meetings were them reminding me what would happen if I failed. And what would happen? The same thing that happened to David Carter, that journalist from Chicago. The same thing that will happen to you if you don't give them what they want. He leaned forward, his eyes pleading. Goldie, these people don't make empty threats. They have connections everywhere. Police, government, judiciary. You can't beat them. So you want me to just hand everything over, let them get away with it all? I want you to survive, he said, his voice breaking. Give them what they want, and they'll leave you alone. It's the only way. I stared at my father, this man who had chosen fear over fighting back, who had abandoned his mother to face these monsters alone, who was now asking me to do the same. And if I don't, then I can't protect you. His eyes wouldn't meet mine. No one can. Grandma thought I could finish what she started, I said quietly. She believed in me even if you don't. My father reached out to touch my arm. Goldie, please, just tell me what you found, where it is. I'll make sure they know you've cooperated. A chill ran through me as I realized what was happening. This wasn't just a warning, it was an attempt to get information from me. Had he called them already? Were they on their way? I need time to think, I said, pulling away and heading for the door. I'll call you tomorrow. Goldie. Tomorrow, Dad. In the car, I let out the breath I'd been holding and wiped away angry tears. I had pretended to consider his plea, but in my heart I had already made my decision. My grandmother had spent years gathering evidence, risking her life to break free from these people. I wouldn't betray her by giving up now. Back at the motel where I was staying, I found more frames I hadn't yet examined. Behind a certificate of appreciation from the town's historical society, I discovered a handwritten note listing police officers and government officials with amounts next to their names' payoff records. And at the bottom, circled in red, Captain Lloyd Davis, Maple Creek PD. The police chief in our town was on the Sullivan payroll. Now I understood why my grandmother hadn't gone to local authorities, why she had been gathering evidence for the FBI instead. But if local law enforcement was corrupted, who could I trust? My phone rang. It was Jackson. Goldie, I'm at the emergency room, he said, his voice strained with pain. Someone broke into my apartment tonight. They were waiting for me when I got home. Oh my God, are you okay? Couple of cracked ribs, broken nose, concussion. They took my laptop, my files, everything related to what we've been working on. This is all my fault, I whispered, horror washing over me. No, Jackson said firmly, despite his pain. This is their fault. But Goldie, the message was clear. They said to tell you, this is your last warning. The threat wasn't subtle. If they would do this to Jackson, a respected attorney with connections, what would they do to me? For the first time, I truly understood the danger my grandmother had been facing alone all these years. With Jackson in the hospital under observation for his concussion, I felt more alone than ever. The motel room, with its faded wallpaper and lumpy mattress, offered little comfort as I spread out all the evidence I had gathered so far. There had to be more, something conclusive enough to bring down the Sullivan organization once and for all. Among my grandmother's papers was a receipt for a storage unit rental made out to Margaret Smith rather than Wagner. The address was for a facility in Appleton, about an hour away. My grandmother had been using an alias, which meant whatever she kept there was important enough to hide thoroughly. The next morning I drove to Appleton, constantly checking my rearview mirror for signs of being followed. At the storage facility, a bored attendant barely looked at me when I claimed to be Margaret Smith's granddaughter who had lost the key. A copy of the death certificate and $50 later, I was walking down rows of identical metal doors until I reached Unit 227. When I rolled up the door, I found a small space containing only a single filing cabinet and a cardboard box. But what they contained made my heart race. 3 decades of meticulously organized records documenting the Sullivan family's operations. Financial transactions, photographs, recorded conversations transcribed by hand, and most damning of all, a folder labeled blackmail containing evidence of payoffs to judges, police officers, and politicians across 3 states. There was also a manila envelope addressed to Agent Caroline Banks, FBI, with a note in my grandmother's handwriting. Caroline enclosed is everything we discussed. I'm sorry for the delay, but I needed to be certain. Call me when you receive this. Margaret. The envelope had never been mailed. I loaded everything into my car and called Nate from a gas station payphone, not trusting my cell phone anymore. My grandmother was working with an FBI agent, I told him. I need to find out if this person is still active, if I can trust her. I'll look into it, Nate promised. But Goldie, be careful. These people have resources we can't imagine. Back at my grandmother's house, Eleanor helped me set up small wireless cameras. Nate had purchased one at the front door, one at the back, and one in the living room. Just in case, she said, showing me how to view the feed on my phone. That evening, while reviewing more of my grandmother's papers, I came across mentions of medical bills for my mother. I had always been told she died of cancer when I was 4, but I had never known the details. According to these records, my grandfather had been desperate for money to pay for experimental treatments not covered by insurance. The dates matched when he first became involved with the Sullivans. My phone chimed with an alert from the security cameras. Someone was at my grandmother's house. I watched in disbelief as Detective Preston Howard, the officer who had taken my break-in report and dismissed my concerns, used a key to let himself in. He moved with purpose, checking the frames I had already emptied, looking under furniture, and finally using some kind of device to scan for electronics. I called Nate immediately. The police are in on it. Detective Howard is searching Grandma's house right now. That might not be the whole story, Nate replied. I did some digging on your FBI agent Caroline Banks. She was transferred to the Denver office 6 months ago, which seems odd timing given your grandmother's investigation. And I found something else. There's been an ongoing internal investigation into information leaks from the local FBI office to criminal organizations. So we can't trust the FBI either. I didn't say that. Just be careful who you contact. The next morning, my phone rang with an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. Miss Wagner, this is Agent Howard. I think it's time we talked. My blood ran cold. How did you get this number? The same way I got a key to your grandmother's house. She gave it to me. His voice was steady, professional. I need to speak with you in person. Alone. It's about your grandmother's investigation. Why should I trust you? I saw you searching her house. There was a pause. I know how it looks, but Margaret Wagner was my confidential informant for the past 5 years. I need to make sure her evidence is secure. Prove it, I demanded. She called me Percy because I reminded her of some character from a book she liked. She made me apple pie every time we met. And she talked about you constantly, how proud she was of your teaching, how you had her creative spirit. His voice softened. She was doing all of this for you, Miss Wagner. Details only someone who truly knew my grandmother would know. Still, I wasn't ready to trust him completely. I'll meet you tomorrow, I said. Public place of my choosing. That's not a good idea. You're being watched. Take it or leave it. He sighed. Fine. Text this number with the details. Before I could reply, Nate called with breakthrough news. He had fully decrypted the flash drive. The contents were even more explosive than I had imagined. Among the files was a video recording dated shortly before my grandfather's death. On screen, an emaciated Frank Wagner lay in a hospital bed delivering what amounted to a deathbed confession. My name is Frank Wagner. My grandfather began, his voice weak but determined. I'm recording this as evidence of criminal activities I've been forced to participate in for the past 15 years. He detailed how he had borrowed money from Patrick Sullivan's father to pay for my mother's cancer treatments, and how when he couldn't repay it, they forced him to launder money through his antique business. The video showed visits from Sullivan associates threatening him even as he lay dying, and most shocking of all, footage of a much younger Senator Philip West, explicitly discussing how the operation worked. They're threatening my family now, my grandfather continued, tears in his eyes. They say they'll go after Thomas and little Goldie if Margaret doesn't continue the arrangement after I'm gone. I can't let that happen. This video is my testimony against them. I watched through tears as my grandfather, a man I had barely known, tried in his final days to protect us. And I realized why my grandmother had waited all these years to act. She had been gathering enough evidence to ensure the entire organization would fall, not just a few sacrificial members. As the video ended, I heard a car door slam outside the motel. Through the curtains, I saw my father getting out of his car, looking around nervously before approaching my room. I quickly hid the flash drive and opened the door before he could knock. "What are you doing here?" I demanded. "How did you find me?" "We need to talk," he said, pushing past me into the room. "They know you went to the storage unit. They're coming for everything, and they won't ask nicely this time." "Did you tell them? Are you working for them now, Dad?" "It's more complicated than that." He ran a hand through his graying hair. "I've been playing both sides for years. They think I'm their loyal soldier, but I've been helping your grandmother gather evidence. You expect me to believe that after you told me to give them everything. I said that because I knew you wouldn't. You're stubborn, just like Margaret." A sad smile crossed his face. "But I needed you to think I was against you in case they were listening. Why all the secrecy? Why not just tell me the truth? Because the less you knew, the safer you were." He sat heavily on the bed. "But that's over now. They're getting desperate. Senator West has too much to lose with an election coming up. They've sent their best people to find the evidence and eliminate anyone who's seen it, including me." My father couldn't meet my eyes. "There's one more piece of evidence your grandmother hid. Something that ties everything together, proof of Senator West's direct involvement in money laundering, blackmail, even ordering the murder of that journalist." "Where is it?" "I don't know exactly. She said it would be where art and heart meet. That was our code for anything related to you." He looked up at me. "She believed in you, Goldie. More than she ever believed in me." Before I could respond, headlights swept across the motel window. A black SUV pulled up next to my father's car. "They followed me," my father whispered, his face paling. "I led them straight to you." Two men in suits stepped out of the vehicle. Even from a distance, I could see the bulges of shoulder holsters under their jackets. My father grabbed my arm. "Go out the bathroom window. Take my car." He pressed his keys into my hand. "I'll stall them." "Dad, no. For once in my life, let me do the right thing." He pushed me toward the bathroom. "Find the last piece of evidence. Go to Detective Howard, he's FBI undercover. He was working with your grandmother. He can be trusted." "How do you know that?" "Because I've been feeding him information for the past year." He gave me a quick, fierce hug. "Now go." I squeezed through the small bathroom window as I heard pounding on the motel room door. Running to my father's car, I heard shouting, then a gunshot that made my blood run cold. I wanted to go back, but knew it would only get us both killed. With tears blurring my vision, I started the car and sped away from the motel, my father's sacrifice hanging heavy in my heart. The local hospital emergency room buzzed with fluorescent lighting and hushed voices as I paced the waiting area. My father had been brought in with a gunshot wound to the abdomen, alive but critical. The police were treating it as a robbery gone wrong, but we both knew better. "Family of Thomas Wagner," a nurse called. When I approached, she offered a sympathetic smile. "He's out of surgery. The bullet missed his vital organs, but he lost a lot of blood. He's asking for you." In the recovery room, my father looked pale and small against the white sheets. Tubes and monitors surrounded him, beeping steadily. "Goldie," he whispered when he saw me. "You're safe." "What happened after I left?" "They wanted to know where the evidence was. I convinced them you'd taken it to a lawyer who would release everything if anything happened to you." His voice was weak, raspy. "They shot me to send a message, but they need me alive to help find you." "I need to get you protection," I said, reaching for my phone. "No." His hand caught mine with surprising strength. "Listen to me. There isn't much time. The final piece of evidence, Margaret hid it in the frame of that drawing you made her in 2nd grade. The one she kept on her bedroom wall. I remembered it immediately, a childish drawing of our family standing in front of the antique store, rainbows and flowers surrounding us. My grandmother had kept it displayed proudly all these years. "What is it?" "A safe deposit box key." The contents will bring down West and the entire Sullivan operation. He squeezed my hand. Find Howard. Tell him everything. He can protect you. I left the hospital with my mind racing. If Howard was truly FBI and had been working with my grandmother, he was my best chance at bringing these criminals to justice and keeping my father safe. I texted the number he had called from arranging to meet at a coffee shop near the courthouse the next morning. Agent Howard was not what I expected, younger than I had imagined, with alert eyes that constantly scanned our surroundings. He showed me his badge discreetly under the table. I've been deep undercover in the Maple Creek PD for 3 years, he explained quietly. Your grandmother was my most valuable informant. When she got sick, she became concerned about protecting her evidence, and you. Why didn't she just give you everything? She was careful, wanted to make sure every piece of evidence was properly documented and legally obtained, and she was concerned about leaks within the Bureau. He sipped his coffee. She was right to worry. We've had suspicions about an agent feeding information to the Sullivans. I told him about the storage unit, the flash drive with my grandfather's confession, and finally about the safe deposit box key hidden in the picture frame. We need to retrieve that key immediately, Howard said. If your father told Sullivan's men about it under pressure, they could be heading there now. We drove to my grandmother's house in Howard's unmarked car, constantly watching for surveillance. The childhood drawing was still hanging where it had always been a splash of color in my grandmother's otherwise formal bedroom. Carefully, I removed it from the wall and opened the back of the frame. Taped to the inside was a small key with a tag from First Midwest Bank. This is it, I said, holding it up, but we don't know which branch or even which box number. Howard examined the key. This type is used by the main branch downtown. Your grandmother had an account there, right? Yes, for as long as I can remember. At the bank, I presented my grandmother's death certificate and my identification. The manager, a woman who had known my grandmother for years, expressed condolences before escorting us to the vault. Mrs. Wagner accessed this box frequently in her last months, she commented, as she inserted her master key alongside mine. Inside the small metal box was a USB drive, a handwritten letter addressed to me, and a thick manila envelope labeled Evidence, FBI. I handed the envelope to Howard, who quickly looked through its contents. This is it, he said, his voice tight with excitement. Bank records directly linking Senator West to Sullivan, money witness statements, photos of meetings, everything we need to bring charges. Your grandmother built an airtight case. As we left the bank, Howard suddenly tensed. We've got company. He nodded toward a black sedan parked across the street. Sullivan's men. They must have been watching the bank. How would they know to look here? Someone tipped them off. Howard's hand moved toward his concealed weapon. Let's get to my car. Stay casual. We walked briskly toward the parking garage where we had left Howard's car. As we entered, the dim concrete structure, footsteps echoed behind us. Howard pushed me behind a concrete pillar, just as 2 men in suits entered, guns drawn. Federal Agent Howard shouted, displaying his badge while keeping his weapon aimed at the men. Drop your weapons. Instead of complying, the men split up, taking cover behind parked cars. You're outnumbered, Howard, one called. Give us the evidence and the girl, and you might walk away from this. Howard looked at me. When I start shooting, run for the stairwell. Get to the street, find a crowd. I can't leave you. That evidence is more important than either of us. Go. Gunfire erupted, the sound deafening in the enclosed space. I sprinted for the stairwell, the manila envelope clutched to my chest. Behind me, I heard Howard returning fire and men shouting. As I pushed through the stairwell door, another man was coming down from the upper level, one of Sullivan's thugs, cutting off my escape. I froze for a split second before remembering something from childhood. This parking garage had been here when I was little, and my grandmother used to park on the lowest level when visiting the bank. There was a service corridor that connected to the adjacent building, the old library, now a community center. I darted back into the garage, keeping low and running between cars away from the gunfire. The service door was where I remembered, partially hidden behind a support column. It was marked employees only, but the lock had been broken for years. I slipped through just as I heard more shouting from the main area. The narrow corridor led to a utility room in the community center basement. I emerged into a hallway just as a children's story hour was letting out, providing perfect cover as parents and children filled the space. Blending in with the departing families, I made it to the street and immediately called 911, reporting gunshots at the parking garage. While waiting for the police to arrive, I received a text from a number I didn't recognize. Got out. Meet at Eleanor's. H. I made my way carefully to Eleanor's house, watching for any sign of being followed. Howard was already there being tended to by Eleanor for a graze wound on his arm. What happened? I asked, handing him the evidence envelope I had protected. They were waiting for us, he said grimly. Someone knew exactly where we'd be. There has to be a leak in the bureau. But who? Howard's phone buzzed with a message. As he read it, his expression darkened. It's Agent Banks, the one your grandmother was originally working with. She's been under investigation for months. They just found offshore accounts linking her to the Sullivans. He looked up at me. She's been their informant all along. That's why your grandmother never sent the evidence to her. So what do we do now? We can't trust the local FBI office if Banks has connections there. Howard thought for a moment. I have a contact in the Chicago field office, someone completely separate from this investigation. We can send everything to him, have him bring in a clean team. Nate, who had been quietly listening, spoke up. Before you do that, I have an idea. Why not use Banks to our advantage? Feed her false information while we set up the real takedown. Howard considered this. A sting operation. It could work, but it would be dangerous. I'll do it, I said without hesitation. My grandmother spent years building this case. I'm not going to let it fall apart now. All right, Howard agreed reluctantly. But we do this carefully. First, we need to make sure your father is protected. By evening, we had arranged for a trusted officer from the state police to guard my father's hospital room under the pretense of investigating the robbery. Then we crafted our plan. I would contact Senator West directly, claiming to have evidence I was willing to sell to the highest bidder. The meeting would be arranged at an upscale restaurant in Green Bay, public enough for safety, but private enough for our purposes. Wearing a wire provided by Howard, and with Nate monitoring remotely, I arrived at the Capitol Grill the following evening. Senator West was already seated in a private corner booth, looking every bit the distinguished politician in his tailored suit and practiced smile. As I approached, I noticed my father sitting at the bar, not in a hospital bed where he should have been, but here watching the meeting unfold. Miss Wagner West greeted me, standing briefly as I sat across from him. I must say this meeting comes as a surprise. I knew your grandparents only slightly through community events. Let's not pretend, Senator, I replied, keeping my voice steady despite my racing heart. You knew my grandfather well enough to threaten him on his deathbed. It's on video. His smile didn't falter, but his eyes hardened. You have an active imagination, young lady. Perhaps grief has affected your judgment. Perhaps I conceded, but evidence doesn't lie. I have bank records, photographs, witness statements, everything my grandmother collected over 20 years. Now his smile dropped. What exactly do you want? $500,000. Cash. And assurance that my father and I will be left alone. West leaned back, studying me. You're nothing like Margaret, are you? She was driven by some misguided moral crusade. You're practical. I respect that. Do we have a deal? $500,000 is steep. I need to see what I'm buying first. I opened my purse and slid a single photograph across the table West with Patrick Sullivan at what appeared to be a private club. There's more where this came from. As West examined the photo, I glanced toward the bar. My father was watching intently, and when our eyes met, he gave an almost imperceptible nod. It was then I realized he wasn't there. As part of Sullivan's team, he was backup, still playing his double role. I think we can make a deal, West finally said. But not here. Let's continue this conversation somewhere more private. I don't think so. Either we finish this here or not at all. His expression darkened. You don't seem to understand your position, Miss Wagner. You're not the one making demands. He gestured subtly, and I noticed two men at a nearby table watching us. My associates will escort you to a more suitable location. I'm not going anywhere with them. West's voice dropped to a menacing whisper. Your grandmother played this game for years because we allowed it. She was careful, patient, and ultimately harmless. You, on the other hand, are becoming a nuisance. There are consequences for that. As he spoke, the two men stood and began approaching our table. My heart pounded as I realized the plan was falling apart. Howard was outside in a surveillance van too far away to intervene in time. Senator West, a voice interrupted. My father stood beside our table, swaying slightly as if drunk. Fancy seeing you here. Mind if I join my daughter for dinner? West's eyes narrowed. Thomas, I thought you were. Indisposed. Got better, my father slurred. Amazing what they can do these days. Bullet goes in, doctors take it out. He dropped heavily into the seat beside me. You threatening my little girl Philip. Your daughter is making some very serious accusations. Accusations that could damage a lot of people, including yourself. Yeah, well, maybe it's time for the truth to come out. My father's hand found mine under the table and squeezed reassuringly. West signaled to his men who moved closer. I always thought you were smarter than Margaret Thomas. Don't prove me wrong now. What happened next unfolded in seconds. My father suddenly lunged across the table, grabbing West by his expensive tie and slamming his face into the wooden surface. As West's guards rushed forward, my father shoved me toward the kitchen exit. Run, get to Howard. I hesitated for only a moment before sprinting toward the back of the restaurant. Behind me I heard shouts and the sound of breaking glass. As I pushed through the swinging doors into the kitchen, startling the staff, a gunshot rang out from the dining room. Dad! I screamed, turning back, but one of the cooks grabbed my arm. This way, miss. There's men with guns out there. He led me to a service exit that opened into the alley behind the restaurant. Howard's van was parked at the far end, and I ran toward it, tears streaming down my face. Just as I reached the van, more gunshots echoed from inside the restaurant. Howard pulled me inside, already calling for backup. What happened? My father, he's in there. He attacked West. I heard gunshots. As police sirens wailed in the distance, the restaurant's back door burst open. My father staggered out, clutching his side, blood seeping through his fingers. I rushed to him as he collapsed against the van. Dad, oh God, you're hit. It's not as bad as it looks, he gasped, though his pallor suggested otherwise. West's men, they're coming. Howard helped get my father into the van and sped away just as the senator's men emerged into the alley. As we drove toward the hospital, my father gripped my hand. I heard everything on the wire, he explained through gritted teeth. When I realized he was going to take you, I had to act. Why were you even there? You should have been in the hospital. A weak smile crossed his face. Couldn't let you face him alone. Been doing that too long already. As he drifted into unconsciousness, I pressed my hand to his wound, trying to stop the bleeding. Howard drove faster, weaving through traffic toward the emergency room. He saved you, Howard said quietly. And he may have given us exactly what we needed. The wire caught everything West's threats, his admission of knowing about the evidence, combined with what your grandmother gathered. Will it be enough? I asked, tears streaming down my face, as I watched my father's life literally slipping through my fingers. Yes, Howard said with certainty. It's enough to bring down West the Sullivans, all of them. But there's something else your father said that you should know. What? I couldn't reveal my true identity until I was certain I could trust you. I've been undercover so long I couldn't risk blowing my operation. He glanced at me briefly. Your grandmother understood that. She was helping me build the case against the Sullivans, but she made me promise that if anything happened to her, I'd protect you. As we pulled up to the emergency entrance, my father was whisked away on a gurney. Standing in the hospital hallway, covered in his blood, I realized the full weight of what my grandmother had done and what she had asked of me. She hadn't just been collecting evidence. She had been ensuring that when the time came, the right people would have it. And now that time had come, the hospital waiting room became command central over the next 12 hours. While surgeons worked to save my father, Howard coordinated with his trusted contact in the Chicago FBI office. Agent Gerald Martinez arrived with a team of 4 agents, all carefully vetted and with no connections to Agent Banks or the local office. Your grandmother's evidence is extraordinary, Martinez told me as we huddled around a table in a private conference room the hospital provided. We've suspected Senator West's connections to organized crime for years, but could never prove it definitively. This gives us everything we need for warrants. Howard explained our suspicions about Agent Banks being the leak. We need to move quickly before she realizes what's happening. Agreed, Martinez said. We've already secured the evidence from the safe deposit box and what you gathered from the storage unit. My team is preparing to execute simultaneous raids on Sullivan properties and Senator West's offices. What about my father? I asked. He's still in critical condition. We've assigned protection. No one unauthorized gets near him, Martinez assured me. A doctor entered the conference room, still in surgical scrubs. Miss Wagner, your father is stable. The bullet damaged his liver, but we were able to repair it. He's unconscious but should recover with time. Relief flooded through me. After everything, I wasn't going to lose my father, too. There's one more thing we need, Howard said once the doctor left. The key piece of evidence connecting everything, the contents of that childhood drawing frame. I had almost forgotten in the chaos. It's a key to another safe deposit box. We already retrieved the contents. Not that Howard clarified. Your father mentioned something specific about where art and heart meet. The drawing itself might contain hidden information. I hurried to my grandmother's house with 2 agents for protection. The childhood drawing was still where we had left it after removing the key. Taking it back to the hospital, we examined it closely under bright lights. There's nothing unusual about it, I said after several minutes of scrutiny. Just a kid's drawing of my family in the antique store. Wait, Martinez, said taking the drawing. Look at the store sign in your picture. The lettering is different from a child's handwriting. More precise. I looked closer and realized he was right. The sign for Wagner Antiques had been drawn with a steadier hand not by 7-year-old me, but added later perhaps by my grandmother. And when I looked even closer, I noticed tiny numbers written along the bottom of the sign, almost invisible unless you were specifically looking for them. It's a sequence, Howard said, writing down the numbers. Coordinates, maybe. No, Martinez interjected, studying the numbers. It's a date and time followed by what looks like a meeting ID and password. Nate, who had joined us at the hospital, confirmed it. It's for a cloud storage service. Your grandmother created a digital dead man's switch. If she didn't log in for a certain period, the files would automatically be sent to a list of recipients. Using Nate's laptop, we accessed the cloud storage using the credentials from the drawing. Inside was a video file dated just 3 weeks before my grandmother's death. Her face appeared on screen looking tired but determined. If you're seeing this, I'm gone and Goldie has found my message in the frames, she began. This is my final testimony against Senator Philip West, Patrick Sullivan, and their criminal enterprise that has corrupted our community for decades. She proceeded to detail everything she had witnessed over 30 years, naming names, dates, and specific crimes. She explained how my grandfather had been coerced, how my father had tried to protect us by playing both sides, and how she had been gathering evidence all along, waiting for the right moment to act. I couldn't come forward earlier because they threatened my family, she continued, her voice breaking slightly. But I won't let them threaten my granddaughter's future. Everything I've gathered has been verified and authenticated. Use it to end their reign of terror once and for all. The video concluded with a personal message to me, Goldie, my darling girl. I'm sorry to place this burden on you, but I know your strength, your heart. You see the truth in things just like you did in your art. I love you, sweetheart. Be brave. By morning, Martinez's team was ready to move. The plan was to execute simultaneous raids on Sullivan Properties, Senator West's offices, and the homes of several corrupt officials. Howard would lead the team arresting West while Martinez handled the Sullivan compound. What about me? I asked as they prepared to leave. You stay here with protection, Howard insisted. You've done enough. No, I said firmly. My grandmother started this. My father was shot twice for it. I need to see it through. After some debate, they agreed I could accompany Howard's team but would remain in the car with an agent during the actual arrest. As we prepared to leave, a nurse rushed into the conference room. Miss Wagner, your father's awake and asking for you. I found my father propped up slightly in his hospital bed, pale but alert. Goldie, he whispered when he saw me. Did you get the evidence to the right people? Yes, Dad. It's happening today. They're arresting West and the Sullivans. Relief washed over his face. Your grandmother would be proud. He reached for my hand. I should have been braver like her, like you. You saved my life at the restaurant, I reminded him, squeezing his hand. That was plenty brave. A shadow crossed his face. There's something you need to know before they move on West. Caroline Banks, the FBI agent your grandmother originally contacted, she's been feeding information to the Sullivans for years. She's how they always stayed one step ahead. We know. Howard figured it out. No, you don't understand. Banks won't be at her office when they look for her. She's meeting West this morning at the First Midwest Bank. They're removing evidence from another safe deposit box, one your grandmother mentioned to Banks before she realized she couldn't be trusted. I immediately texted this information to Howard, who replied that they would adjust their plans to include the bank. I have to go, I told my father. They're moving now. Be careful, Goldie. His eyes, so like my grandmother's, held mine. Remember, these people have nothing left to lose. The First Midwest Bank was already surrounded by FBI vehicles when we arrived. Howard directed me to stay in the car as promised, but I could see through the glass front of the bank that something was wrong. Senator West and a woman I assumed was Agent Banks were at the center of the lobby, and they appeared to be holding bank employees at gunpoint. It's a hostage situation, the agent with me explained, listening to updates through his earpiece. They were already inside when our team arrived. Howard approached our car. West and Banks are demanding safe passage out of the country. They're threatening to kill the hostages if we don't comply. How did they know we were coming? I asked. Someone must have tipped them off. We're still not sure who. Howard looked troubled. They're asking for you, Goldie. They want to trade the hostages for you and all copies of the evidence. That's ridiculous. You can't agree to that. Of course not. But we need to resolve this without casualties. He hesitated. There's something else. They claim to have another hostage already, someone they brought with them. A chill ran through me. Who? Howard's expression confirmed my worst fear. Eleanor. They must have taken her to use as leverage against you. My mind raced. Eleanor had been nothing but kind to me, had been my grandmother's dearest friend. I couldn't let her die because of this. Let me talk to them, I said suddenly. Not as a trade, but to negotiate. Absolutely not, Howard replied. It's too dangerous. I knew Eleanor. More importantly, I know what was in that safe deposit box they were trying to access. I can convince them it's not worth killing for. After heated debate, Howard finally agreed to let me speak to West and Banks by phone while negotiators continued their work. A call was patched through to the bank's main line. This is Goldie Wagner, I said when the line connected. Miss Wagner, Senator West's smooth voice replied. How nice of you to join us. I believe we have a mutual friend here who would like to say hello. I heard Eleanor's frightened voice. Goldie, dear, don't worry about me. Her words were cut off abruptly. Enough pleasantries, West continued. Here's the situation. You've caused me a great deal of inconvenience. Now you're going to make it right. By doing what? Trading myself for the hostages. That won't solve your problem. The evidence is already with the FBI. Not all of it. There's still the matter of certain recordings your grandmother made. Recordings that Agent Banks assures me are in another safe deposit box, one we haven't been able to access. I glanced at Howard, who nodded confirmation they had indeed found additional recordings in a second safe deposit box secured by the Chicago office. Those recordings are already in FBI custody, I told West. It's over. The best thing you can do now is surrender, and avoid adding hostage-taking to your charges. You naive little girl, West sneered. You think this ends with me in handcuffs. The Sullivan organization has weathered federal investigations before. People have short memories, and money still talks. Not this time, I said, an idea forming. My grandmother didn't just leave evidence of your crimes. She left a fail-safe. If anything happens to me or anyone else involved in this case, everything goes public, not just to law enforcement, but to every media outlet in the country. Your complete financial records, the names of everyone you've ever bribed or threatened, video confessions, all of it. There was silence on the line. I pressed on. You can kill me. You can kill Eleanor and every hostage in that bank. But you can't kill the truth anymore. It's already out there, set to release automatically unless I stop it. And right now, Senator, I don't feel much like stopping it. I could almost hear him calculating his options. Finally, he spoke again, his voice tight with controlled rage. What exactly are you proposing? Release the hostages, all of them, and surrender peacefully. In return, I'll make sure the media focuses on the Sullivan family's role in all this. Your public statement will emphasize that you were being blackmailed and cooperated with authorities once you realized the extent of the corruption. You expect me to believe you'd do that after everything that's happened? I don't care about destroying you personally, Senator. I care about justice for my family and everyone else the Sullivans have hurt. This gets us both what we want most. Another long pause followed. I heard muffled conversation as West presumably conferred with Banks. How do I know this isn't a trick? He finally asked. You don't. But what choice do you have? Even if you escape today, you'll spend the rest of your life running. Is that really how you want to live? The negotiation continued for another tense hour, with Howard and Martinez feeding me information through notes. Finally, West agreed to release the civilian hostages first, then Eleanor in exchange for written assurance that his cooperation would be noted during prosecution. I watched through the car window as bank employees and customers slowly emerged with their hands up, followed by a shaken but unharmed Eleanor. FBI agents quickly escorted them to safety. Finally, West and Banks emerged, hands raised, surrounded immediately by tactical teams. As they were led to separate vehicles, West locked eyes with me through the car window. There was no remorse in his expression, only cold calculation. A man already thinking about his next move, his next angle. But for now, at least, he had lost. Eleanor was brought to my car where she hugged me tightly. "Your grandmother would be so proud," she whispered. "So very proud." As we drove back to the hospital to check on my father, news was already breaking about the arrest of Senator Philip West and the revelation of his connections to organized crime. Martinez confirmed that simultaneous raids on Sullivan properties had netted Patrick Sullivan and several key lieutenants. "What about Agent Banks?" I asked. "How did she get involved with them?" "Money, most likely," Howard replied. "The Sullivan family has been bribing officials for decades. We'll know more after we investigate her finances, but initial reports suggest she's been on their payroll for at least 5 years. Which means my grandmother realized she couldn't trust Banks and had to find another way to get the evidence to the FBI," I concluded. "Exactly. That's when she reached out to me through an anonymous tip line. It took months to establish trust between us, but once she realized I was legitimate, she became my most valuable informant." At the hospital, we found my father awake and watching the news coverage. His face showed relief as the reporter detailed the arrests. "It's really over?" he asked as I entered. "Yes, Dad, it's really over." The tears that filled his eyes spoke volumes. After 30 years of fear and compromise of playing both sides to protect what family he had left, the weight had finally been lifted. "I never thought I'd live to see this day," he said quietly. "Your mother would have been so proud of you, Goldie. So would Frank and Margaret." As I sat beside his hospital bed, holding his hand and watching justice unfold on the television screen, I felt my grandmother's presence. She had carried this burden alone for so long, gathering evidence piece by piece, waiting for the right moment, the right person to finish what she had started. That person had been me all along, where art and heart meet my childhood, drawing my connection to her. She had trusted me with her legacy, and somehow, despite the danger and fear, we had succeeded. Outside the hospital window, the sun was setting on a day that had changed everything. The frames that had held my family's secrets had finally revealed their truths, bringing down a criminal empire and setting us free at last. 6 months after Senator West's arrest, I stood in the federal courthouse in Chicago, my hands steady as I placed them on the Bible. The grand marble courtroom was packed with journalists, lawyers, and curious spectators, all eager to witness the culmination of what the media had dubbed the frame job, the case that had exposed decades of corruption and organized crime, reaching into the highest levels of state politics. "Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?" the clerk asked. "I do," I replied, my voice stronger than I had expected. As I took the witness stand, I could see my father in the gallery, still moving cautiously as he recovered from his injuries. Beside him sat Eleanor and Nate, who had become like family during the months of preparation for this trial. Agent Howard, now promoted for his role in bringing down the Sullivan organization, sat at the prosecution table, giving me an encouraging nod. For the next 3 hours, I testified about everything the picture frames my grandmother's evidence, the threats, the confrontation with Senator West. I described my grandfather's video confession and how my grandmother had spent decades meticulously documenting the Sullivan family's crimes. When the defense attorney for Patrick Sullivan rose for cross-examination, his approach was immediate and aggressive. "Miss Wagner, isn't it true that your family financially benefited from the very criminal activities you're now condemning?" I met his gaze steadily. My grandfather was coerced into laundering money after borrowing funds for my mother's cancer treatments. My grandmother spent the rest of her life gathering evidence against the people who threatened and exploited our family. Any benefit came at a terrible cost, one my grandmother ultimately paid with her life. And yet your father continued working with the Sullivan organization for years after your grandfather's death. How do you explain that? My father was trapped in an impossible situation. He stayed involved to protect his family while secretly helping my grandmother gather evidence. When it mattered most, he risked his life twice to help bring these criminals to justice. The questioning continued, but with each attempted attack on my family's credibility, I responded with the documented evidence my grandmother had so carefully preserved. The facts spoke for themselves. During a recess, the lead prosecutor, Diane Harmon, approached me outside the courtroom. "You did beautifully in there," she said. "Your grandmother built an extraordinary case, but your testimony brought it to life. The human cost of these crimes is what the jury needs to understand." "Do you think it will be enough?" I asked. The Sullivan family had hired the best defense attorneys money could buy. "More than enough. Patrick Sullivan has already approached us about a plea deal. He knows the evidence is overwhelming." She smiled. "Your grandmother's work is going to dismantle an entire criminal network. That's an incredible legacy." When court resumed, I watched as Patrick Sullivan himself took the stand. Now in his 70s, the man who had terrorized my family for decades looked smaller than I had imagined, his expensive suit hanging loosely on his frame. As he testified about his organization's operations, occasionally glancing in my direction, I felt not fear but a profound sense of closure. During his testimony, Sullivan described his first meeting with my grandfather, confirming everything we had learned. "Frank Wagner was just one of many small business owners we used," he explained with disturbing casualness. "The antique business was perfect for our purposes: cash transactions, subjective valuation of merchandise. When he tried to back out, we had to make an example of him." I found myself locking eyes with Sullivan as he spoke these words so callously about my family. For a moment, his practiced composure slipped, revealing a flicker of something like recognition, perhaps even respect, before his mask of indifference returned. 3 weeks later, the verdicts came in guilty on all counts for Patrick Sullivan, Senator West Agent Banks, and 5 other key members of the organization. As the judge read the sentences ranging from 15 years to life imprisonment, I held my father's hand tightly, both of us finally free from the shadow that had hung over our family for generations. Outside the courthouse, reporters gathered for statements. I stepped up to the microphones, my father beside me. "Today isn't just about punishment for crimes I began. It's about breaking cycles of corruption and fear that have controlled too many lives for too long." My grandmother, Margaret Wagner, spent 30 years gathering the evidence that made today possible. She never lived to see justice done, but she never stopped believing it was possible. As spring turned to summer, I used part of my inheritance from my grandmother to establish the Margaret Wagner Foundation, dedicated to helping families affected by organized crime and corruption. With Eleanor's guidance and my father's surprisingly effective administrative skills, we created programs providing legal assistance, counseling, and financial support to those trying to break free from criminal influence. The antique store that had been both my grandparents' legitimate passion and their prison became the foundation's headquarters. We renovated the space, preserving its Victorian charm while creating a warm, welcoming environment for those seeking help. The back room where money had once been counted and laundered became an art therapy studio where I worked with children who had experienced trauma. My father, fully recovered physically, if not emotionally, found purpose in speaking to law enforcement agencies about how organized crime infiltrates legitimate businesses. His first-hand knowledge proved invaluable in training officers to recognize the signs of money laundering and coercion. "I spent too many years being part of the problem," he told me one evening as we closed up the foundation office. "It feels good to finally be part of the solution." Our relationship, strained for so long by secrets and distance, had begun the slow process of healing. There were still difficult conversations, still moments of pain when we confronted the past, but there was also forgiveness and a growing understanding of the impossible choices he had faced. On the first anniversary of my grandmother's death, I finally returned to her house, our family home which I had been avoiding since the trial. The place felt different now, lighter somehow, as if the secrets hidden behind its walls had finally been released. In her bedroom, where I had found that crucial childhood drawing, I noticed one frame I had somehow overlooked during my initial search. It contained a simple photograph of me at my college graduation, my grandmother beaming proudly beside me. When I opened the back, I found not evidence, but a letter sealed in an envelope with my name written in her elegant script. Sitting on the edge of her bed, I carefully opened it. "My dearest Goldie," it began. "If you're reading this, then you've discovered what I've hidden, and I hope you've found a way to use it. I've carried these secrets for so long, gathering evidence piece by piece, waiting for the right time. But I realized the right time might not come during my life, and so I prepared everything for you. I chose you not just because you're my granddaughter and I love you beyond measure, but because you have something special, the courage to face truth, no matter how painful, and the compassion to understand why people make the choices they do, even bad ones. Your grandfather was a good man who made one desperate choice that trapped him for the rest of his life. Your father tried to protect us all in the only way he knew how. I chose to stay and fight in my own quiet way. Now you have chosen your path too, and whatever it is, I know it was the right one for you. My last wish is that you live freely without the burden of secrets and fear that defined so much of our family's life. Build something new from the ruins of our mistakes. Create your own legacy of truth and beauty. With all my love now, and always, Grandma Margaret. Tears streamed down my face as I carefully folded the letter. Even at the end, she had been thinking of me, preparing the way, believing in my ability to finish what she had started. The next day, I hung that final picture frame in the foundation's main room, not hidden away, but prominently displayed where everyone could see it. Beneath it, a small plaque read Margaret Wagner. She sought truth and justice when it seemed impossible. As autumn painted the Wisconsin landscape in brilliant reds and golds, I settled into a new routine. The foundation was thriving, helping families across 3 states. My father and I had dinner together every Sunday, slowly rebuilding our relationship one conversation at a time. I had even started dating again. Jackson and I were taking things slow, both of us changed by the events of the past year. One crisp October afternoon, as golden light slanted through the antique store's restored stained glass windows, an elderly man entered the foundation. He introduced himself as George Carter, the brother of David Carter, the journalist who had been investigating the Sullivans before his murder 30 years ago. "I've been following your story in the news," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Your grandmother's evidence finally proved who was responsible for my brother's death. After all these years, we can finally have real closure." He handed me a small package. "These are David's original notes from his investigation. I thought they belonged here with the foundation that finished what he started." As I thanked him, I realized how many lives had been touched by my grandmother's quiet determination, and how many more would be helped by the foundation that bore her name. She had transformed decades of fear and oppression into a legacy of hope and healing. That evening, as I prepared to lock up the foundation office, I paused before a collection of frames now hanging on the wall, not hiding secrets anymore, but displaying photos of families we'd helped, thank you letters, news clippings about successful prosecutions stemming from my grandmother's evidence. The frames that had once concealed a dark past now showcased a brighter future. My grandmother's final words had set in motion not just the downfall of a criminal empire, but the creation of something new and meaningful from its ashes. I had run from danger that first night, but in the end, I had run toward truth, toward justice, toward healing, exactly as my grandmother had hoped I would. And in doing so, I had discovered my own strength and purpose. As I looked at those framed symbols of both concealment and revelation, I finally understood why my grandmother had chosen this particular method of preserving her evidence. Frames don't just hide, they also protect and highlight what's valuable. She had framed not only photos and documents, but a pathway to freedom for our entire family. Have you ever discovered something unexpected that completely changed how you viewed your family or your past? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this story touched you, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who might need a reminder that it's never too late to seek truth and justice, even when it seems impossible. Thank you for listening to my story, and I hope it inspires you to look more closely at the frames in your own life. You never know what truths they might reveal.